Alright, time for more Trajanus versus Trajanus. And to kick off this episode, we're going to continue with that thug-based Macone build, although in this case it is up against a Vanheim build, sort of, for this first battle. So in this first battle, it's actually just up against two mercenary groups that have been recruited by Vanheim. And we have a grab bag of Hoplite and Slinger PD, maybe a little bit too much PD. You do have to be careful about HP routing your thugs off. And then we have a standard Polemark group, one of whom has been kitted out in anti-thug capacity, and the other has been kitted out in an anti-chaff capacity. Same bus that we saw in the last episode, and in this case we have only Construction 2 level items and relatively light kitting, right? So trying to see kind of what is the minimum that we can get away with. And yeah, they're not up against that much. Pirates are pretty awful. However, these lizards are pretty dangerous. These aren't even the elite lizards. These are just, regular lizard warriors, I think. Yeah. So they have no armor, but they do have 2 attacks, one of which is a trident, which is piercing, which means that our armor is not going to be as effective. And I mean, 20 damage is kind of scary in general, but extra scary on that piercing attack. And then we have up to, I think, Alteration 4 for these Polemarks. So they have Summoned Earth Power, making themselves almost fatigue neutral in their base armor, as well as putting on Stone Skin and Temper Flesh. Stone Skin over Iron Skin is possibly a mistake, but since we are up against Vanheim, shock damage is a pretty major concern, and of course Iron Skin gives you shock vulnerability. The Province Defense helping us out quite a bit here, right? Keeping a lot of the chaff busy and spreading out what we're going to have to go up against. But we can see pretty quickly, like, we're getting some repels. This is the fellow, I think, with the Great Sword of Sharpness. I think a repel build on, Macone is something worth considering. Not sure if it's worth it, and there are a lot of things that don't care about being repelled, so, that's some concern. Of course, that's not what we've done here with our regeneration, but you can see that, like, we're taking quite a bit of chip damage, and, +4 regeneration is decent, but it's not amazing, and we're really starting to stack up the damage here now that the chaff has been removed, and we are more or less surrounded. And of course, part of what I was testing here is, like, how cheaply can we kit out these thugs and still get away with things, and something that if we were going to spend more gems, we could also maybe replace this helmet with a horned helmet. So if each of these fellows had a horned helmet, they would each have another attack, and then you can also give them the little kicking shoes. And then we would be sitting on 6 attacks for these Polemarks instead of just 2. Now, I mean, that would cost us more gems, although of course one of them already does have a helmet, so it's a wash there, but still a significant amount more gems. We're also getting stunned by the Holy Spell from one of the mercenary commanders, and especially once they get stunned, take a lot of damage. And yeah, the morale has broken, I think, on both of them. So, of course, morale being a problem on these guys. That said, they have taken a ton of damage. The other thing, too, we'll see if we can catch it, but both of these guys have been dipping down into, I think this guy here, they're negative hit points, right? So they have quite a bit of Undying on the Bless. And Undying is pretty much always useful, but extra useful, if you can regenerate, because it's not quite as good as actual hit points, of course, right? Because if you increase your hit point total to the next threshold of regeneration, you get more regeneration per regeneration tick, whereas Undying hit points do not help you in that case. But you can see that, just regular lizards, took out our Polemarks. So, kind of a mark against this Bless, I would say. Again, we could kit them more heavily, and, I do think we would have won in that case. It's also not inconceivable that we would have, routed these guys. They don't have amazing morale, so, this could have conceivably gone in our favor, but, the fact that we have Alteration 4 research also possibly, is it really worth not doing Iron Skin, even if you're up against a faction that has a decent amount of shock damage? Because, I mean, we had no shock resistance, so if we get slammed with a couple lightning bolts, I mean, it's going to hurt more, absolutely, but is it really going to make the difference? Whereas when we're up against mundane troops, Iron Skin, just a few more points of protection might have helped us win that battle. So this was just some rating, and I think I was so disgusted by the results of this battle that I set down this save file for a little bit. But it is actually poised right on the edge of a major battle, so we're going to go ahead and advance the turn. and then we can take a look at a battle that I have not actually seen the result of yet. Alright, and naturally I did not pay attention to what the province name was for the massive battle, so we're going to have to take a look at some thug battles as well, which might be interesting. Okay, yeah, this is it. So in this case, we have Vanheim riding out from a fort defense. This fort had been cracked, so there's some desperation summoning, right, that's been going on, and wasting some nature gems on some fire ants, which I think is, like, as far as low-level summons go, are decent, and the horned serpents, which also, yeah, they're not amazing, but they're at least some bodies. We also have some yetis, which I'm not sure. I think we got them from our pretender, who is this fellow here. And I don't want to dive too much into Vanheim's Bless, because eventually I'll be taking a build somewhat similar to this into multiplayer. For the moment, that pretender is just going to spam out some lesser water elementals, and then we've also brought quite a few Van Jarls and a lot of our sacreds, as well as just some regular elven troops, a few lizard shamans with some bodyguards, and then opposing them we have quite a few mercenaries, right? So some barbarian mercenaries, just regular macemen, some archer mercenaries, as well as just kind of a few peltast raiding groups that we've collapsed in to help break down this fort, along with some of our mages. No gems really on Macone's side. I'm not really sure what happened there. Definitely I would have liked to bring some gems looking back on this. So yeah, can't really explain what happened there. We have, two thugs pretty similarly kitted to the fellows that we just saw die, although both of these guys are using great swords of sharpness. This guy has enormous strength. They also have some gigantes set to bodyguard. Personally, I am kind of back and forth in terms of, like, should you put a bunch of elite bodyguards on your thugs, or should you just collect all your elite troops into one squad and, use them as, like, normal units? I think both of them have their advantages, certainly in the bodyguard configuration, right? These thugs are not going to have to fight alone against, like, say, a bunch of lizard warriors. So it is going to help considerably with their survival, and it also helps ensure that if they have a relatively long script, the thugs that is, the elite troops won't run ahead, because, you can only have them the troops wait for 2 rounds. So yeah, I do think that Vanheim is going to come away with this, partially just because they have, a lot more gems. You can see that there's some lesser air elementals coming out from Vanheim. It's a little sad that we're only at lesser elementals this late in the game. We have, just the chaff out in front. We didn't really focus on a conjuration scheme for Vanheim, so I think we have construction 4 with Vanheim, but yeah, I don't know, I'm kind of questioning that. Yeah, so we have limited evocation coming out from Macone. There was some magma bolts. I think there's also a few lightning bolts, fireballs queued up, and let's actually get team colored squares on so we can see what's going on. And yeah, we can see, like, the thugs, right, they're taking their sweet time, and that does mean that, a lot of the army, especially the barbarians who are undisciplined and they run forward immediately, they're fighting, like, we're fighting with a lot of our best troops not actually involved. On Vanheim's side, I do think we have a thug in here. Yeah, so there's this fellow whose fatigue is maybe a little on the high side after his script, and he is actually more kitted out to try to deal with low levels of province defense. He's sort of in a raider configuration, and we've sort of just, again, conscripted him into this fort defense. In terms of the bless on Vanheim, it is important. We kind of have a mix, trying to support both our elven thugs, not that Vanhears mind resistances, but also provide, some things the Vanhears are going to like, particularly the blood bond is pretty nice on them, and they do like the natural protection. The natural protection, a bit anti-synergistic with your elven thugs, right, since they're less likely to be hit, and they don't have very high protection anyway, so an extra 5 protection is not huge. And the blood bond is probably just bad on the thug chassis. Like, it at best, I don't know about at best, mostly neutral. Well, maybe mostly bad. Sometimes they can operate in pairs and, spread the damage out a little bit. It helps a little, but then sometimes in large battles like this, you can see that I've tried to spread them out some. But Vanhears are super dangerous, right? So, we're going to start to see things disappear in all likelihood. And we were hoping that the archers were going to pop more glamours. There are some Vanhears that have had their glamours popped, and yeah, here comes the lightning, tried to do a little bit of A/B testing with the Polemark thugs, one of them putting Iron Skin on and the other one putting Stone Skin, and also the Earth Resist Lightning spell. So let's see. Yeah, this is the guy with Iron Skin. It looks like the guy with Stone Skin, I think is, no, he ran away. No, excuse me, he just got distracted by an air elemental, and like, yeah, this guy is the one who has shock weakness. And in this case, like, Vanheres are so scary that, like, yeah, there's a lightning bolt. But I think we're going to see, like, once this guy starts getting hit by lightning bolts, like, is it really going to matter all that much? Like, lightning is really dangerous, and we've given these Polemarks, right, like, no kit for any elemental resistances. And that is one of the things about, this particular build. Yeah, I think the armies have routed completely from a cone. Yeah. So this thug probably will escape. But that is one of the things about this build, right? There's no resistances built in for Macone. The idea is to cover it with items. Of course, if you don't have the research, or maybe possibly in this case you just didn't forge the items, we don't have too much of an air income, I think, as Macone. Maybe none. I can't remember offhand. But yeah, if you don't have the items, then that's going to be a big problem for the resistances. And like, yeah, Vanheim does come away with this pretty handily. Although I do think that was a situation where with Macone, we just didn't really bring enough stuff, or at least, we brought more than Vanheim, but what we brought, we didn't, a lot of what we brought was just kind of like, mercenary garbage. It is important to state that Macone is on the back foot in this situation. Raiding with the elves and trying to counter raid is a struggle. So, that's good news for the Vanheim build and bad news for the Macone build. So Macone definitely had less resources to bring to this fight. And for all the issues, with this particular Vanheim build, which we will discuss in gory detail at a later date, like, it's fairly killy, which again, with Vanheres even unblessed are pretty killy. So no great feat there, but I am decently happy with it. I think probably the biggest change for this battle is there's really like no excuse that these Polemarks had absolutely no shock resistance gear, right? Like, it's all well and good to put, stone skin on instead of iron skin, but it's like, yeah. So I'm really not sure what happened there with past me, but that is, if you're not going to cover your elemental holes with the bless and the plan is to do it with the items, you do need to execute on that. All that said, I don't really think it would have changed the outcome of this battle, and this, I think, fairly adequately demonstrates that thugs in armies are difficult to make much of a difference. I think, these guys, like, they were set up as anti-elites. I was concerned that they wouldn't be able to actually connect with the elven troops, but they just didn't have enough attacks to like really matter. I mean, part of the issue is, they died relatively, well, one of them, the one that got into combat, died relatively quickly. But with just the one attack, like, they just weren't all that likely, to do all that much. Actually, now that I'm remembering, one of the issues with Blood Bond is when you overkill a unit, right, that damage is going to spread out to the other units. So I think that's some of what I was thinking with the Great Swords of Sharpness, because they do deal a lot of damage, and with Blood Bond, that will be transferred out to the other sacreds. But you can see it didn't really work here, and it wasn't like a very viable strategy. Normally for army thugs, you would go with, more attacks. So, dual wielding, or, like we talked about the shoes or the horned helmets, like, just try to stack as many attacks on your thugs as possible. Let your units, your chaff, be your defense. But yeah, I do think that like army-based thugs are pretty difficult to pull off, but it is something that, I think is worthwhile to work in, right? We just have a little bit of leftover pirates, and we send them against some PD. I don't think that's going to work out, although hilariously, this guy did manage to pick up one of those Maces of Eruption, and sadly, when a mercenary gets an item, it's theirs now. You can't actually pull it off of them. But, 4 pirates, not that scary. This battle, though, I am a little bit interested in. So this is kind of one of the Macone raiding groups, along with a little bit of province defense. Like, yeah, same kind of thing, right? Let's see what kit he has. Yeah, pretty similar kit. I think he got this rabbit foot charm off of an elf. And again, going with the Great Sword of Sharpness here, I think for trying to see how effective it is against like the overkill against Blood Bond. In this case, we are not up against any elven sacreds, just some regular elves, and a single Van Jarl who's going to spam out some imps and some lesser air elementals. And again, no elemental resistance on this Polemarch, and so like, yeah, that's gonna be pretty scary. No gems for this Polemarch group. That said, like, 5 Gigante bodyguards is pretty scary. And like, yeah, our Ichthyeids don't do fantastic, but once we connect, like, yeah, a lesser air elemental, even 2 of them, it's not going to do that much because these guys have magic weapons, and so yeah, they are able to kill everything relatively quickly, but still, it's very sad that we have that shock resistance hole. And of course, that is one of the issues of not putting resistances directly onto the bless, right? Just because you can cover something like with spell casting or items, I know that's a criticism that's often leveled against the Barkskin bless because it is relatively expensive in terms of points. And there are a lot of protection spells which give, the Barkskin effect that occur at a relatively low level of research. So I think a lot of people feel that, it's kind of wasted bless points because you can replace it with spells relatively quickly. But, relatively quickly could mean, 20 turns, even 30 turns, depending on how things go and depending on how your nation is set up. Whereas bless is pretty much available from turn 1. So anyway, let's move on to our next battle. All right, so in this battle occurring on turn 30, we have a Scales Vanheim build, I think with basically no bless, or maybe literally no bless. That's just going to be summoning in a bunch of air elementals, and they have plenty of elven troops here as well. And they are going up against Early Age Urmor, who has brought a decent mix of stuff, right? We've got some archers here, hoping, of course, to pop the elves' glamour, some legionary infantry, just to keep the elves off of our spellcasters, who will hopefully be one of, if not the main killing components of this army, along with some of our Equite, who of course are pretty excellent. But in this case, this whole game was set up to test whether or not, or maybe just like how safe it was to drop magic weapons from the Early Age Urmor Bless, because it is extremely expensive to fit both penetration, which requires astral bless points, and magic weapons requiring the same onto the same bless. And Early Age Urmor would also like a penetration bless. It's a little bit odd because they don't actually have any sacred mages. Actually, I think the Flamen is sacred, but yeah, with the Flamen, I wouldn't rely on them for your combat power. The Augurs, which you recruit from your forts, are not sacred. But you do get a discount on the Shroud that lets you, it's an armor that you can wear, and it can make, any commander holy. So as long as you're willing to, spend some astral pearls as Early Age Urmor, you kind of can have a sacred mage core, and it's not the craziest thing to take a mage bless. And so in this case, we have rushed Evocation, which is traditionally, not considered a genius play. However, we have pretty strong Evocation paths. I mean, fire is a good evocation path, but specifically we have the air death cross path. So we're looking at like Wailing Winds, Wind of Death, and then we also have the fire death cross path, which gives you access to Banefire, which I know a lot of people swear by. It is a lot of armor negating damage, and on paper it looks like a really scary spell. And then yeah, air elementals. Air elementals are scary. So let's take a look. Yeah, we have a small communion going up. And then, yeah, these guys, what are they doing? Probably air shield. Yeah, because, and then a little bit of fireball casting. And we do have evocation. I'm not actually sure who the fireball is coming from. Yeah, here comes the Wailing Winds. We're also pumping out some skeletons. I do hear the air elementals being summoned. Yeah, there's some of them coming in. And then there's the Banefire right there. So we do manage to take out an air elemental with that. Unfortunately, like one of the issues, perhaps the issue, I think, with Banefire is the precision is not great on it. So I'm not sure if this Augur Elder managed to hit himself or one of his buddies did, but he's now decaying, which is a big problem because he's just a human, so no long lifespan. And he's also already 72, so that's not good. He also managed to hit some of our Equite, who actually do have a longer than normal lifespan and, aren't already almost 80, but still that's not exactly ideal. We have a fire cloud going up here, and our infantry is getting absolutely demolished by air elementals. right? We have another air elemental stacking up, and of course, normally our Equite with magic weapons, I don't know, could handle it easily, but certainly like much more effectively than they're handling it now. We also have just some fire evocation. There was some falling fires there. There's like fireball that missed. We've set some of our own bodyguards on fire, and the air elementals have completely destroyed our front line. Some of the elven troops, it looks like, have routed possibly. Yeah, so one squad of the elves have routed. So I'm not sure actually who managed to pull that off. Possibly some of our Equite. It looks like some of them were on attack rear. But now our Equite are mixed up with the other squad of elven troops, along with still quite a few air elementals. One downside of rushing Conjuration, and I do think that we just went straight down to Conjuration 5, and I don't think we really have any other research hardly at all with Vanheim, is that once you've summoned your air elementals, you don't really have a lot to cast. So that said, banishment is a bit better than normal because we are summoning undead here, so they can still use their priest levels to be somewhat useful. But we're probably not going to get any lightning bolts or anything like that. And then it looks like the archer squads have routed, and we're just making undead. That's the other thing too, right? Trying to convince these guys to cast Banefire off script. It's not that I think that they won't. I've definitely seen them cast it off script, but especially once we get low on units, they're like, we need to bring in some dead. And they're not even necessarily wrong, but if they're bringing in dead, then they're not spamming out Banefire. So the dead are never going to be able to kill. Well, I mean, if you summon enough, you can, with enough skeletons, almost anything is achievable. But with the amount of dead that we were able to summon against the amount of air elementals that we're up against, it didn't work out. And this, it looked a little closer, I think, than it really was. Because if we look at the battle report, we can see that Vanheim really didn't lose too much, right? They did have one of their squads retreat, but probably a lot of those guys survived. And almost the entire Ermorian army was wiped out, and we really didn't do that much. Now, that said, we only had 8 mages here, right? And if the plan is okay, we're going to be relying on our Augur Elders for our magic damage, and we only bring 5 of them, one of whom is more or less going to be completely consumed casting Wailing Winds, at least in terms of a damage output perspective. Clearly, it was not enough. That said, while Augur Elders are indeed recruit anywhere, and for the amount of paths that you get, they're pretty cheap. They're still not cheap, in a universal sense. 210 gold is quite a bit, and they are slow to recruit, so they're kind of extra expensive in the sense that you need a decent amount of infrastructure up, right? You need quite a few forts up to really take advantage of the fact that they're recruit anywhere, coupled with the fact that you probably are going to want some augurs, both for research. They're also probably better at raiding, and just because you're not always going to be able to afford augur elders, when you're putting up some of that infrastructure that you're hoping to use to get more augur elders down the line. So while you could certainly have more mages and bring more mages to a fight at turn 30, it is still fairly challenging to mass augur elders. And I think this highlights that, if you're not going to put magic weapons on the Equite of the Sacred Shroud, you really need to think about, okay, well, where is my magic damage going to come from? And if you're going to try to use Augur Elders and Banefire and all that, I think Banefire is a good spell, right? But it has targeting issues, and you, like all evocations, you really need to have a lot of mages, casting that to have a major effect on the battle. So I would say, to tilt this, we'd probably need at least double, maybe triple the number of Augur Elders that we brought. And maybe an evocation strategy could still be successful, but rather than trying to rely on Banefire, you just mass augurs, right, and rely on, fire magic for your magic damage. The danger there being, of course, that fire resistance is pretty common, both on blesses and, units. And if that's what you're relying on for your magic damage, right, you could definitely run into a situation where it's don't really have an answer to this, which is why Banefire is more attractive. But if your plan is to rush for Banefire, you better make sure that your plan is also to really focus on building a lot of Augur Elders. Personally, I will stick with putting magic weapons on the Equite of the Sacred Shroud. So I think that covers it for this week. Hopefully these battles have been interesting, and thanks for watching.